they have dominated. Sebring is now wearing the colors of the purple and orange. Up front, Charlie Collins, Elvis Rankin, round 2 winners in the IMSA Esports Global Championship, conquering the AMD 240.
Hello again, everyone. I'm Matt Yocum. Welcome to another edition of the IMSA Endurance Hour podcast. Now, the 2025 IMSA WeatherTech season, it's in the history books. It's in the rearview mirror. And we're all counting down until the Rolex 24 kicks off in January of 2026. But for IMSA sports car fans, there's a great gap in between, and that's when we go virtual racing with the IMSA Esports Global Championship. Now, we're right in the middle of Season 4. We've got Arjuna Kankipati, who's part of the broadcast, and also Robby Foley, BMW factory driver. So we've got the best of both worlds to preview the final 2 races. Well, first, Robby, kind of explain to us your role when it comes to the IMSA Esports Global Championship.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me, Matt, and great to be back with you guys and chatting about some cool stuff. So yeah, my involvement, I'm kind of an avid sim racer myself, as much as I can be for being active full-time racing. I'm on Team BS Plus Competition, which is an official BMW sim team. So I'm involved in sim racing as much as I can be, and so far this season I've been helping out doing the track previews for iRacing and IMSA before the races. So just giving my perspective on the track, taking kind of the fans for a lap, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far.
When you look at the numbers of fans, I mean, nearly 200,000 fans have watched the first 2 races this year, and I think that's a great indication of just how much fun it is, because it's that gap between the end of one season and the beginning of another. And it's a great way for the fans to fill it with some more racing. So if you've got that, that need, and you're like, oh man, I cannot wait until the cars come back. But now if you go to, IMSA's YouTube page and you can see all of the action. And so Arjuna, kind of walk us through the first 2 races, Road Atlanta and then also Sebring.
I love how you say that, we get this chance to fill in the gap, but I also think it's different from any other sport, right? You look at soccer, football, Madden, FIFA, there are video games, but it's not the same. You're on a controller, not with a wheel, not replicating what the drivers that you see out in the real world are doing. And so that's where I think esports has always filled that kind of gap in the sim racing world. And we've seen some great action. Road Atlanta is a track that everyone knows and loves. And in the sim world, everyone's more aggressive through traffic. I think Robby can probably attest to this as well. And so we saw some crazy stuff. Our leader got involved in an incident on cold tires coming out of pit lane. Team Redline ended up taking the victory, Coanda Esports and GTD. And then we've just come off a spectacular race at Sebring where Coanda, after being involved in that incident on cold tires in the outlap of their pit stop sequence, dominated and went on to win the race, while their GTD counterparts were locking out the front row and then went on to finish 1 and 2 as well. So we've seen really strong showing from some teams, plenty of others still looking to pick up some speed, I would say, in what is a very short championship season.
And Robby, when you look at the sim world, comparing it to reality, how close for the fans at home, when I watched it and I'm like, this looks exactly, I'm looking for the guys at Sebring, that had the fish tank and the Western town, because there's just so much reality when you're watching all the things off the track and as well as the action on it. So when you're looking at, Road Atlanta or looking at Sebring, and coming up, we've got basically a double header in a way, Long Beach for the GTP cars, and then also VIR for the GTD cars. So what are some of the things that would surprise fans of just how close to reality it really is?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think Arjuna touched on it a little bit as well with the interaction with the fans. It's the one thing, in my opinion, we have to make the sport relatable to the fan. Whether they're sim racers or not, they can kind of get the gist and participate themselves, and then also have the iRacing series to watch as well. So there's certainly parallels. It makes the sport more relatable. And I think for the sim racers, it gives them a chance to show their stuff. But as you just said, with the broadcast and how the races play out, there's tons of similarities, and it mirrors the real race. Of course, it can never be exactly 1-to-1 because it's virtual, but it's damn close. And when you watch these races, I caught both of them myself, and you see and actually remember things that happened in the real Petit Le Mans or happened at Sebring, the way the tracks race, the way prototypes overtake GTs, the way GTs hold up prototypes, and that kind of aggression and stuff. The styles are identical. One being in the real world, one being virtual. So it's very cool to see that kind of camaraderie between the two disciplines. Let's say they are two different disciplines, but they mirror each other at the same time.
Now, when you talk to a lot of older drivers and they're not big fans of the sim when they're going to prepare for, whether it be an IMSA WeatherTech race or a NASCAR race, it seems like the younger folks can really snap their fingers and just lock right in, whereas it's a little bit more of a challenge. But I think also it's generationally where you spent more time growing up playing, video games. When you look at the similarities that you mentioned, but also some of the differences, you don't get the G-force and sort of the physical feedback that you would get, with the body. But looking at strategy, looking at weather changes, what tire to choose, those are some of the things that probably, help with the book of knowledge for kids that are wanting to take a step at some point from the virtual world going to the real world of being behind the wheel of a real IMSA WeatherTech machine.
Yeah, for sure. And to me, that kind of sparks three ideas in my mind. I mean, I guess kind of coming back a few years, my involvement in all this started because of really the pandemic, and BMW actually used iRacing and sim racing and the first version of, let's call this IMSA iRacing series, as a way to keep drivers and engineers fresh during the off time. This was back in the era of GTLM, and that's where BMW's factory program was focused, but we involved the engineers from the factory GTLM team in the sim racing. We even did, reports and things like that, which sounds silly and tedious, but it actually helped to keep the rhythm going for the season. And it was great. And I guess to your point about the older drivers not liking it, I see that all the time, and I actually understand it because you don't get the real feel and you're missing a lot of inputs that if you have never done it before, your first few attempts will be rather shocking. There's like a limit of frustration, I would say, that you have to push past. You either choose to or you don't, right? Mm-hmm. For me, as you said, I would say my racing career kind of started that way. I did some go-karting in the SCCA autocrossing kind of world, which not racing wheel to wheel, but driving through cones. But I played a ton of Gran Turismo. I was an early adopter of iRacing. Actually, I've been on since 2010. Not as serious as I am now, but I am very used to not having the feel through the seat and everything. I know the differences in the two. Back to that frustration level, I think if you can push past that as a driver, it is a immensely valuable tool to train your brain and to train how you adapt. There's certain things about the sim that when you're operating at a really high level, like my teammates do when I train with them, that are a little bit unrealistic in a way. You're maximizing the physics of the simulator, right? Not necessarily unrealistic for real life, but you're very unlikely to find these techniques in the real car. But if you're a real driver and you can adapt to them and you can figure it out and you can get on pace with the sim pros, let's say, that teaches your brain really how to adapt to the changing track condition, which we know, say, for example, at Sebring, from the time the race starts to the race ends, the track changes so much. And same with Petit Le Mans, Road Atlanta, both those races going from night to day. So if you're a really adaptable driver, on iRacing, I think it really teaches you how, or at least it's a good exercise for how to work on your craft in the real car, albeit it's not exactly 1-to-1. It can never be, but it's damn close these days.
And Arjuna, we talked about the differences and similarities for Robby and the sim drivers. For you in the broadcast booth, you've got a couple mates, but where is everyone located, and how does the challenge change for you when you're on pit lane or you're in a booth at an event versus now you're calling a virtual race off monitor?
It's a great question. And I think that we're now in, we're talking about post-COVID as well, where a lot of broadcasting is done remotely. Not everyone is in person. So from that perspective, it's not that different than I think what some people experience in the real world. The benefit of the sim, and I think this is true for drivers as well, is the amount of data that you have access to. The ability to retroactively go and place a camera somewhere so you can go and look at something that's happened that maybe wasn't shown on the broadcast, but you can have a deeper understanding of what's been happening in the race. Just the fact that our timing screens have more information as well. That's something that I've had a couple of chats with John Heindorf about, well, how do I call a real race with limited information now? Because I've gone from having all of these pages of information and now it's a lot more condensed. It's really fun, though, in the sim world when you have all of this insight. We can do some stuff that's unrealistic. And I once did a broadcast where we had someone who'd commentated on Le Mans. And we had this great camera shot showing the run down the Mulsanne in its entirety, basically. He pulled out his camera, took a picture of it, sent it to the TV director, and asked if he could have that in for the next year. So I think there's a lot of ways that in the real world you can learn from the sim broadcasts as well. So I think that's pretty cool.
And I love when you hear stories from different drivers, Robby. I was talking to Joey Hanna and Mike Rockefeller, and they were talking about when they were preparing for Le Mans, and they were in the sim, and apparently at some part of Le Mans, there is an elderly lady who had a flower garden, and they saw that in the sim, and they thought it was funny until they got to Le Mans and saw that the lady actually had the flower garden. It was right up near the racetrack. So it's incredible how much effort goes into just the smallest of details.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a quick similar story like that, but just to paint the picture to that, all the tracks are laser scanned, so the surface is identical. Every bump, of course things can change over the years, but in general, every bump, every undulation, all the elevation is exactly accurate, including the terrain around it. They take a lot of pictures, and all that, which leads into my story. The first time I did Le Mans, or the only time I did Le Mans, actually, I was jet lagged, just landed in Paris. I'm driving to the track. It's days before the event. I'm trying to find the credential center, and I've come from the U.S., so I'm a little foggy. And I'm just driving on this road. I'm following my GPS, and I look up and I see this Burger King. And I'm like, hang on a second. I've seen this on iRacing. I'm actually on the Mulsanne straight. So as you guys know, or most people know, that track is mostly roads. So it was still not blocked off, and they often open it up. So just a funny story to think about. I actually recognized where I was, not looking at my GPS like a millennial, based on the fact that I saw the Burger King on the straight. So I can totally relate, and it's very cool to see little silly things that you wouldn't think about. For example, you can turn your graphics up and down however you like, but Sebring, there's still the hotel on the side of turn 7 where there is, and you can find these landmarks that if you've been racing long enough, you notice these little things, which is really cool.
I go back to the racing sim, Pippo Durrani and Ian Watt, then at Action Express, and he'd been in the sim getting ready for Long Beach, and he went out for his first outlap, and all of a sudden he came on the radio and he's like, "Wow, man." And they're like, "Everything okay?" Yeah. He goes, "I just went past the water fountain, and I'm going to tell you, it's just as tight in real life as it is in the sim." So I love how technology, because I go back and Arjuna we were laughing about this earlier, Robby, that I remember about 25 years ago, I was over at a friend's house and we're going to go out for the night. And he goes, "Hey, go ahead and jump on my computer. NASCAR 2 is up." That's how old it was. I'm like, all right, so I'm just digging, and I'm at Martins Valley. Man, I'm just yarding the competition. 22nd, I'm just killing them. And he comes out after about 25 minutes. He goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm P1, man. I'm just killing it." And he goes, "Hang on one second." And he hit a button. He took me off arcade. The very next corner, I went straight on in, flipped up and over. And so it definitely is one of those hand-eye coordination deals. And when you talk about that, Robby, and there's so many opportunities now for kids trying to break into racing, whether on the driving side or looking at the engineering side or mechanical side. But one of the things when you talk about budgets, and back in the day, it was so much less expensive to try to work the ladder system. Now it seems like, and I heard Max Verstappen talk about it, that sim racing is the future because you can do so much development with a young driver, but you're not spending all that money and also on crash repair and everything else. So do you feel like that this is definitely going to be the future? And if so, what are some of the things that young kids should put on their radar if this is the path that they want to go?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think if you're not embracing it on some level, I think you're going to be behind. At a minimum, I think even if drivers don't really enjoy the driving side of it because they lack the feel, they still use it to learn tracks. And if you're not doing that, then you're going to show up behind. So, to echo some of, the big voices in the motorsport community like Max Verstappen or even drivers like Alex Palou, they're very high level iRacers. And I think, some of the best drivers or categorically who would claim the best drivers in the world all use the sim. And in the case of those two, they actually do it at a high level, at like an esports level. They commit that much to it. So, I think to your point, as the world's progressed, even in my career in the last 10 years, I personally couldn't replicate the way that I built my career now just from a financial perspective. I think it's important for young drivers to realize how relevant and kind of relatable it can be. I think there's plenty of examples of it too that maybe don't get spoken about so much. Like even in IMSA today, just for example, back in that COVID era of doing the GTLM iRacing stuff, Lauren Heinrich used to be a member of BS competition. He was a big sim racer, still is. He's on Coanda now, being with Porsche. On our team in BS Plus competition, we have a driver, Garrett Lowe, who is from eNASCAR. I worked with him in a series in a real car, and he's been racing eNASCAR in a real car in Europe, and he's been doing really well. He's basically a kid from Charlotte. He went to UNC Charlotte. He's from a great family, but never really had the opportunity to go racing beyond some local short track stuff. And sim racing has given him the opportunity to race around the world. And there's plenty of examples like that. I think, again, in that COVID time period era, we had races with all the, biggest name drivers you want to mention. We're all in these iRacing lobbies kind of training and practicing together. So I think it's definitely the way of the future, because even karting now is getting really expensive, and so are the iRacing sim rigs, to be fair, but it's still a very entry level opportunity, let's say. And you've seen plenty of scenarios of drivers come out of the sim and go into a real car and do really well. Just because you're good on the sim doesn't mean you're going to be good in the real car. Don't want to oversell it. There's certain skills outside of the sim that you have to be good in the real car, but certainly the skills are translatable, and it's a great way to cultivate and find talent.
And sorry, just to kind of pick up on that, because he mentioned Garrett Lowe, and that's someone who I was thinking about as well. Robby's one of our coaches in the Prodigy Racing League, which was my first real-world broadcasting experience, taking gamers, not just sim racers, but gamers and putting them in real cars. And we had someone who had done some karting, but is now a professional 737 pilot. They qualified on their mobile phone. They downloaded a game off the Apple App Store and qualified to get this chance to race in a real car. And they were amongst the quickest talents that we had. Robby was a great coach. We had Catherine Legg, Max Papis, and a whole bunch of great people. But I think what we are starting to see is that there are more and more opportunities for sim racers to make that transition. And like Robby says, it's not just about, though, having driving skills. Suelio Almeida, who has been competing this year in the IMSA Michelin Pilot Challenge, he was a professional pianist who had the confidence in himself to start a sim racing business, take that money, buy a Radical, win a national championship, and parlay that into his ride with Brian Herter Autosport. So I think we're really now in this era where, post-COVID, so many people have taken more attention to what sim racing drivers are capable of, that they're starting to get these opportunities. And that includes more and more shootouts as well. Robby mentioned Lauren Heinrich. He went on to obviously win the Porsche shootout, but they're increasingly making this part of their the ladder. Porsche just did an event at the Coanda Esports Hub where they put their up-and-coming real-world drivers through the paces in the sim. So we are definitely starting to see that crossover more and more.
And Robby, I think if you look at just where technology is with race cars today, it falls even more where the stars and planets line up with the virtual world. Because back in the day, you'd have one hand on the wheel, the other hand, you're shifting. Now everything's, paddle shifting. And if you go back also, look at NASCAR's, champion William Byron. Never raced anything, started out doing sim racing, and then that was his hook. And then he started up, the oval ladder, so to speak. When you talk, Robby, about all the good habits, but there's also some bad habits that you could develop as well, sim racing, when you're trying to then make that transition to the real world. So what are some of the good habits that come from sim racing, but also some of the challenges that you have to look out for?
Yeah, I think first off, you just touched on the idea of simulation and kind of how complex maybe the cars are now. I think for manufacturers, for example, BMW is very invested in simulator racing and sim technology, and I think most manufacturers are these days. But I think like in our case, one of the main tools to use is just for the systems. I don't drive the GTP car too much or at all, really, but the systems in that car are so complex that if you can get on a simulator and go through things you're doing in the real car, that's going to help you immensely in the races. And I think that level of complexity you see in the IMSA races in the real world also translates to the sim. On iRacing, the situation's a little bit less complex, but on a simulator like a manufacturer would have, you're running through all of these different systems. You're running through all scenarios. So when you get to the race, you've never seen anything for the first time. And with the complexity of these cars, that's really important. So good habits, I would say, would be just the ability to drive almost subconsciously or leave a lot of extra brain space for other things. You can drive the lap in the race, no problem. You have the extra brain capacity to talk to your engineers or to think about the strategy or to give the pit stand a little bit of a different perspective than they might be seeing from the timing stand, and do it while still driving at a high level. These are the things that sim racing really challenges you with. And oftentimes in the sim, just on a normal iRacing race, let's say just online in an official race, you're likely running everything by yourself. As a team in BS competition, we have kind of an engineering support staff that support the drivers for the bigger races. But if you're just going out and driving by yourself, a lot of the time you're managing your fuel, your strategy, and whatever while you're driving the car. So I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing that I use it for, is just training my brain to have extra capacity. Also, in the driving side of it, you have to manage tires in the sim. You have to manage fuel in the sim, or energy, as we call it now in a lot of series. So those things are one-to-one. I learned a lot about saving fuel and now energy in the sim, and could really kind of perfect that to where that translated one-to-one into the real car. And I've had quite a few good results completely driven by the fact that I could save an extra lap of fuel, and that really opened up options in the strategy. So,
and that all came from
so many things.
That all came from your time sim racing and spending time in the sim.
Exactly. Yep. And you get introduced to something in the real world, and you can kind of practice it there. But on an IMSA weekend, let's be honest, we don't get a ton of time in the car before the race. We get, I would say, maximum per driver is like an hour before the race at a given track, right? So I can practice saving fuel for 20 hours on my sim in the middle of the week, and you see that out of real drivers. They practice for hours and hours and hours to perfect extremely small details. So it's kind of a general thing, I guess, but the sim really teaches you how to perfect like small, minute details that can really make a difference in a big race, with strategy, with driving technique, all that kind of stuff.
I also love the synergy between reality and virtual, because if you go across the IMSA paddock, you've got BMW, you've got Porsche, you've got AMG. And if you look at 10 IMSA OEM partners are represented between the GTP and GTD classes. So it's neat to see the IMSA family all involved in all areas, because like Robby said, a great tool to look at the future and try to navigate those waters with the next wave of drivers and engineers.
And I like that in the last couple of years, manufacturers have increasingly seen the importance of being on the sim. And so BMW were one of the first to do this, where the BMW M Hybrid V8 was on iRacing before it went racing in the real world. You could drive it in the sim before it went and raced at the Rolex 24 for the first time, right? So I love that we have this representation now. More and more manufacturers want to be a part of it. And obviously slightly biased on my side, IMSA Esports Global Championship running on iRacing. We have a full complement of cars effectively. But IMSA has got its hands in so many different, with so many partners now. There's a new game, Project Motor Racing, that's coming out that's just announced that it's going to have effectively the full LMDH and hypercar class as well. So I love that no matter where you play your games, no matter how you want to, because I think it is important to recognize that some people are going to be super serious like Robby and me. Some people are going to be more casual, and that's fine. They'll play an iRacing arcade, they'll kick back with a controller and have their fun. But as much as we can be serious and talk about sim racing, we should recognize the place that some of these more casual games have in the world to introduce sim racing eventually to maybe a younger audience. So I'm very excited about iRacing Arcade, which comes out December 2nd, I think it is.
Robby, it's like walking through the IMSA paddock where racing, how much money do you have to spend? How fast do you want to go? So when you're starting out sim racing, what is the window of cost to jump in and be on board, from an entry-level sim to, maybe a top shelf?
Yeah, it's a wide range, honestly, but you can get into it for a pretty low price, not much more than like a good console gaming setup like an Xbox or a PlayStation. There's companies like Logitech that you can get a wheel for a few $100s, and as long as you have a PC of some kind, even a laptop. I started on a very crude setup, I would say, back in the day. In like 2010, when I was a kid, I begged my parents for a Logitech G27. So I had that. I had a laptop that certainly didn't have the graphics capability to be running iRacing very well, but it worked and I could race. And I literally like stared at the laptop screen, and that was my my view. And now I don't know if you can see it. I've tried to make it the backdrop, but this is my current sim rig, which has come a long way. I've got triple screen monitors for kind of an immersion view. Got a nice steering wheel and setup. And I've this has kind of been my baby over the past couple of years. I've been upgrading it slowly. And these can cost anywhere on the low end. I would say, you can probably spend between $3,000 and there's some people that have spent $25,000 on a crazy rig for sure. You have a lot of computing power to run these 3 screens, etc. But I can race on this cool looking thing back here against someone like myself back in the day on a Logitech and a cheap laptop. So I think there's a wide range of equipment out there, but really it is kind of like a level playing field. And the cool thing is everybody's got the same car. Of course, you can change the setups on iRacing, and there's a lot to do with that. But there's plenty of series that are fixed. So literally everybody has the same car setup, tire pressure, literally everything. The only difference is maybe your equipment, and sure, that could make a difference, but it's as level of a playing field, I think, as you get, even in the real world. Cars that are 2 cars of the same make could have a completely different setup philosophy and completely different prep level and not be the same car. So it really is as unique of a playing field, I think, as you could really get outside of maybe like a controlled esports event where everybody's got the same everything. And those have happened throughout the world. Arjuna's been a part of those. Something that just came to my mind, sim racing in general, that's kind of how Arjuna got his start. It's not only for drivers, but I think it helps a lot of people that want to become professionals in racing, period. I remember him coming on the scene as an esports commentator a few years ago, and now he's joined us in the real world. So I think in general, the community globally is really kind of buying into this new age in the, we have so much technology available to us. Everybody's kind of buying into the hype, which is really cool to see.
I remember an owner saying one time, Chrome doesn't make it go fast, so, you might be on the lower level of a sim rig or on the high level, but like you mentioned, Robby, pretty much technology in many ways is the same. So talking about your sim rig, the monitors, all the data. So for both of you, and we'll start with Arjuna, in the broadcast booth, you mentioned all of the statistics, the data that you're able to pull from. So what are some of the things that are your go-to?
I have 5 monitors at home, one of which gets split up into 4 sub-monitors. So I have 9 different windows that I can put up on my screen in front of me at any one time. So I can have sim stuff, I can have my points, entry lists, all of this. Whereas on pit lane, I have my iPad, which I picked up from you and the great team at NBC, as much as I'm maybe a bit old school and still prefer my pen and paper. Really, though, it's just like I have an application that tells me car X has spun on track, car X has entered pit lane, car X has passed car Y. Something that it's like telling me in real time what's happening, and then I can filter what I want to talk about and what is relevant to the race at any one time, right? So what's really important to me, I would say that live filter. That's the one tool that I've most relied on, especially in an endurance race, right? Where the IMSA Esports Global Championship only has 2 classes, but the VCO Grand Slams, which are replicas of the Rolex 24, Sebring 12, Watkins Glen 6, and Petit Le Mans, that has LMP2 as well, sometimes with 60 cars. Trying to figure out what's happening at any one time, that's the tool that's been the most important for me.
And for Robby, looking at your sim and all the monitors, what are some of the technology that you have up, helping with chassis setup that you can adjust, while you're out on the track, at speed, much like you would in the race car, whether it's on the steering wheel with the different knobs, you name it, making adjustments as the race wears on?
Yeah, for sure. I would say technology-wise, there's actually a lot that transfers. Like I have a few different data programs that write, let's say in iRacing's case, iRacing produces a telemetry file with all the car telemetry just as our real race car would get. So I filter that through a program which produces a Motec file. For those that don't know, Motec's a very popular data system in race cars. And for example, our M4 GT4, BMW M4 GT4 uses Motec. So actually in some development I did with iRacing to kind of help them develop the car, I took real world M4 GT4 Motec data, drove in the sim, and was overlaying the two at, I have notes in the real data from the track temp, the air temperature, air density, crazy stuff, wind, and I can plug that right into the sim. So when you're developing the car and trying to make it as realistic and help iRacing with some feedback, I've got that tool to literally, one-to-one compare the two cars. And then also we use that a lot within the team, especially for someone like me trying to get up to speed with my really talented sim teammates. Like I was just doing the other night at Sebring. We all kind of do a run, and then we all compare our own data to each other. Maybe occasionally there's something I could teach them, which is pretty rare, to be honest with you. But I'm learning how they're getting the most out of the car and why. It's not always the same as maybe what I would do in real life, but you can understand why and you can adapt, which is great, which, again, as I mentioned before, really is a good brain exercise to keep you open-minded to different things. And then within our team, we use strategy software. It's not exactly like we use an IMSA, but very similar. That's giving you fuel targets, giving you different ideas of strategy. As Arjuna mentioned, in some of these big races, you've got the same situation with, GTP cars, all prototypes and GTs together. The prototypes, I think, influence the GT race way more than maybe the casual fan realizes, especially because of the pace of the race. Just to make an example, if a GTP car is doing a 1:15 at Road Atlanta, flat out, but the GTP cars are playing with each other in strategy, and they're actually averaging, instead of a 1:15, they're averaging a 1:17. That really plays a big influence on the outcome of our race and how many laps we'll do, because ultimately if they're 2 seconds slower for the last few hours of the race because they're all saving energy, that's going to affect how many laps we do. So there's all these little nuances that you really have to pay attention to that I think the sim racing world is great practice for that. And yeah, on my simulator, I have that program that converts to Motec file. We use some other data systems. The kind of more engineer drivers within the sim team, they're using data just like we use in the real car with damping data, looking at tire pressure, tire temperature, all these things. So it is exactly, kind of the same approach. To get the best out of it, sometimes there's different avenues to get there with car setup and things, but even just, outside of drivers and Arjuna's case, commentary, I think it's a great place for engineers to stay sharp and get a fresh perspective on kind of what's going on in racing. And I think that's kind of the next level of stuff that we'll see. I think we'll see some really good racing minds come out of sim racing, strategists, engineers, stuff like that.
It's funny, I was talking to an engineer in the IMSA paddock, and he was like, yes, last weekend my driver was texting me, asking me for setup advice. I was working on his setup for his sim race. You talk about all the different things that have to compile in to have a successful day on the sim, part of the IMSA Esports Global Championship. Do you have to, much like you do in the real world where you're doing your homework, you've got practice throughout the weekend, you're doing the sim going into an event, is it almost like the more laps that you turn in, the Esports Global Championship, the more locked in you're going to be? So another similarity between virtual and reality.
Yeah, I think so, especially for just getting dialed into the track. And it depends kind of your approach and what you're looking to get out of it. If you're trying to compete at the highest level with the best iRacers in the world, that level of execution and perfection and kind of manipulation of physics in a way is a little bit too extreme for kind of practicing for the real world. But if you're looking to learn the track or refresh yourself or just get in the rhythm of, let's say, a street course, I would say for me, that's the best prep for a street course is to go do some laps on iRacing. Long Beach, for example. Again, you don't get so many laps in practice these days. You don't get so many sets of tires. So you really have to leave the pits for FP1 on a good level with the track. Now, to play devil's advocate, a track like Long Beach progresses so much over the weekend. The track changes. It's extremely dirty the first session, and it grips up for the weekend, as many street courses do. And you probably can't mimic that on iRacing. There you have to lean on your real-world experience, which I have now, luckily, done it enough times where I know what to expect from practice 1 to practice 2. So I can't learn that from the sim, to be totally honest with you, but I can get in the rhythm of how I'm coming out of turn 1, following the wall around to then set up just exactly right for the famous fountain corner, which if you set that up just wrong, you're going to get a bad exit out of there. And there's a certain rhythm there that is the same on the simulator, and it's just nice to start to build the muscle memory.
Well, looking at the season, we're halfway through season 4. So we've got Long Beach and VIR coming up and then Daytona. So Arjuna, kind of preview what the fans who are going to jump on IMSA's YouTube channel and watch on November 23rd, some exciting racing.
Well, it's a new format. For the very first time, we're not just doing a 2-hour and 40-minute race with 2 classes of competition. We wanted to try to do something different, and so we said, well, we have GTP, we have GTD. With the tracks that IMSA runs at, where can we do something different? Where can we have something intriguing? And so GTP at Long Beach will have 20 of them without traffic, which I think is going to make for a different sort of a race. And then obviously GTD, 75 minutes for them as well at VIR, without any prototypes to come and influence the race, like Robby says. It's a chance for them to focus just on their strategy. And there's a lot of strategical elements they have to think about. A driver change is going to take you 30 seconds on pit lane. But realistically, you only need to be stationary for about 10 seconds to get the fuel to get you to the end of this race. So I expect wild things. To go back to what Robby was just saying as well, one of the pluses and minuses of sim racing is that you can practice so much, right? We used to give the drivers weather information a week or 2 before the race, which would mean a lot of them were doing tens of hours of practice. And in fact, in some cases, I will wager hundreds of hours of practice in some cases. What we do this year, and I really like this, is they don't find out the weather until 24 hours before. It limits the amount of practice they can have, but it also means that with iRacing adding its weather system last year, this is the first year that we're using it as well. Will there be rain or will there not be rain? Drivers won't know until Saturday rather. And then on Sunday, we'll find out exactly what's going to happen.
But having it split up like that, to me, it would raise the intensity, because now you've got to be even more mistake-free, because you're not going to be able to have a GTD car, as a blocker, so to speak, and to try to juke somebody and gain an edge by having them late pass. All of a sudden, now you've got a GTD car in front of another GTP car, losing time. So it changes up the entire feel and intensity of the event.
And I think especially with the two tracks that we have, right? VIR may be easier to pass than Long Beach, but I don't want to say it's easy by any means. I think Robby can probably attest to that as well. When everyone is so closely matched on speed, it's difficult to fight your way forward without the traffic, like you say, to present opportunities. And so again, 75 minutes is a much shorter race. Drive time is only 10 minutes. So realistically, you could have one driver do 10 minutes to start the race off and then jump out, get a bunch of clean air and sprint, right? So there's all these different ways that you can approach this race. And that's why, like you say, totally different mindset that needs to be kind of worked with. And because it's back-to-back as well, there is limited time to kind of bounce back from any setbacks that you've had at Sebring, and to also dial yourself in for what is a very different style of race, like you mentioned.
So, Robby, when you're looking at drive time and you've got, teammates, are you in the same location, different location? How does that work as far as a driver change? Because you might have someone in one country and your teammate is in another country. So how does all of that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, latency is certainly a thing, but in this day and age, you better have a wired internet connection. I remember when I first joined the team, I was on Wi-Fi, and I got made fun of for that for a good few weeks, just because, it's
See, you ruined your street cred already because you didn't have the proper technology.
Pretty much total noob in that regard. But yeah, there's this thing that in the gaming or sim racing world we call ping and latency, and you're trying to have the best ping you can to the server and where it's closest. Now, if you're driving with someone in Australia or far away in Europe and the server's in America, it's a little bit challenging. But the way it basically works is, oftentimes in these situations, everybody's on their own sim rig. So you come into the pits and basically the pit stop or driver change is initiated by exiting the car. And of course, as Arjuna said, like in Long Beach, for example, that sounds, now that I think about it, sounds a lot like what we do in real life, where our strategy is sometimes driver change limited based on the length of the race and energy we need to take on and stuff like that. So I'm sure all of the teams will be racking their brain about how do we minimize our time loss in pit lane and all that kind of stuff. So it's basically to initiate a driver change is purely like an electronic over the interwebs situation, but it's one of those things that just like in the real world, you have to account for it. iRacing does a really good job of actually, let's say, including that into the situation. You can't just pull the car into the box, press the button to get out, and the next driver presses the button to get in, and they're actually in. They put a time limit for driver changes, as Arjuna mentioned, which that's kind of a static thing, and the driver changes the same time for everybody. Where in the real world, we work on our driver changes to try to be as fast as we can. I think my record quickest driver changes ever is like 10 seconds. Let's say anything under 20 is like a really good standard, and we're shooting for real world 15 to 18 every time. But at Long Beach, for example, our energy fill this year, I think, was 14 seconds or 15 seconds. So you better be in the car strapped and ready to go when they unplug the fuel. So it's really cool to, like, that's kind of the point, I guess, of our conversation here, is just to maybe enlighten people on how many little details are involved in the sim racing world that are also involved in the real world. This makes both sports extremely difficult to follow 100% unless you're really into it. I think we've all seen that throughout our careers and doing different stuff. Racing in general is not the easiest sport to follow in the world. You don't just shoot a ball into a hoop. Not that basketball is that simple either, but there's so much nuance in the world of simulation that is exact to what we're doing in real life, which I think is, again, just to summarize, to come back to the point, why it's such a big deal for manufacturers now and why it's such a big deal for, the young generation of drivers.
I love how IMSA keeps the fans connected. One season ends, we've got this sort of winter heat series where there's a whole nother championship for everyone to follow and to chase. And when you look at it also, 5 iconic IMSA racetracks. And I love the fact that typically we open up our season with our Super Bowl, the Rolex 24 Daytona, and this is where the championship is going to be decided at Daytona. So, Robby, prognosticating the rest of the season, so to speak, what do you think the chances are for your boys and girls to score a championship?
Definitely, all options on the table. I think Sebring was a really good round for the team in general, running at the sharp end of the field in both categories. And I think, just to touch on what you said a little bit too about the level of tracks and iconic tracks, I'm really happy for my teammates to get to kind of experience and drive these places similar to what we're doing in real life. One of my teammates, Reiner, is from Estonia, and it's not so often you would think that someone from Estonia would end up at Sebring, but through sim racing and his relationship, along with some of my other teammates, Ryan, Kai, etc., they actually came to Sebring a few years ago when we did that livery, half sim racing livery, half Turner livery. And Reiner said to me, basically, I never thought I'd end up in Sebring, Florida from Estonia. So, he's racing on a sim rig at home, right, at the virtual Sebring. And because of that, a few years ago, he got to go to the real track. So, the level of these races, the level of competition, and the fact that we can put on a virtual Rolex 24, a virtual 12 hours of Sebring, we can have a winter kind of season with the IMSA series when IMSA is kind of taking the off season, which keeps getting shorter by every single year that we do this. I think it's super cool. So I'm excited to see how my team selfishly does in the next few races. I think Sebring was really strong. And yeah, I'm equally excited, as I think we all are, to see this kind of hybrid race situation with the GTPs at Long Beach and the GTs at VIR, like we do in real life. We have a GT only race at VIR, which I think is probably the reason for the thinking behind it, which would be super cool.
Well, just like the real world, you look at the IMSA Esports Global Championship is like a global all-star race for sim racers. So year 4, the numbers are continuing to leapfrog over what they did last year for the folks tuning in. The excitement ramps up even more. And Robby, we appreciate you stopping by, and good luck for the rest of the season. And as we kick off the real world at Daytona with Roar and then the Rolex 24 in January.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, enjoy the holiday season and look forward to seeing you all in Daytona.
For sure. Thanks, Robby. Well, Arjuna, we talk a lot about your IMSA Esports Global Championship broadcast setup and your tools of the trade that you utilize for each broadcast. But that's in the virtual world. I see you at the racetrack. In the real world, we share pit lane together while you're doing IMSA radio and I'm doing NBC. But where did your spark, your love and passion for auto racing begin?
I think I've always enjoyed racing. I grew up in Singapore, so time zone wise, it wasn't the best to watch a lot of motorsport. But the two that I distinctly remember watching would be Formula One, as many do, but also rallying. It's, they would edit down the programs, cut them into highlights, and I would watch whatever, the 30-minute, hour-long snippets of the rallies, and I loved Subarus. That was, for some reason, a bit of an infatuation of mine. But it all started from there. I don't think I ever thought I would end up talking about racing for a living by any means, or doing this professionally, but yeah, I've always had a passion for it, and then I became a very dedicated sim racer for a couple of years, trying to be a professional before I realized I wasn't talented enough.
Well, how did you utilize, because everyone's career, and people always say, hey, how did you get here? What advice can you give? And I always say, everyone's journey is different because everyone's beginning is different, where they come from. And so you have to basically, whatever path you can go down, that's what you utilize to try to get to the next stage. When you realize, okay, maybe sim racing, this is fun, but this is not going to be a life career. How did you pivot and go down the broadcasting route?
Happened at a good time.
Isn't it though funny how timing,
Yes.
you can't plan it, and you go back and you're like, okay, this is like a Hollywood movie. It almost seems scripted just because of how situations dictate the next step.
Yes. And like you said, the path for everyone is so different. I graduated with a degree in computer science, and I still work as a software developer by day. But around the time that COVID was starting to pick up steam, I had just gotten my US green card, which allowed me to start exploring some other employment opportunities as well. And so as I was falling out of love with the competitive side of sim racing, as much as I enjoy commentating on competitive sim racing, it's a very interesting world to live in and day out and grind. And I found myself realizing that it was not the place for me. I had organized a couple of events and done some broadcasts for them where I contracted out a company called RaceSpot. And so I sent them a message. I said, hey guys, I imagine that you're busy. I've done a few streams on my Twitch channel where I just talked about my teammates racing because I didn't want to race. I still wanted to support my teammates. And I said, look, I think you guys are great. I'd love to learn and let's see what can happen. And I got a reply back saying, yes, please, we need some help. We're overloaded. The main person behind the scenes, Hugo Luis, he was working like 24-hour days, 7 days a week, trying to keep up with all the real world people that were flooding into the sim world. And so he brought me on, taught me a lot, not just about commentary expectations, but about production. And so I have done a lot of directing and producing of iRacing broadcasts. And I think I'm the most recent person who's foolish enough to try and commentate and direct an iRacing World Championship race at the same time. That wasn't intentional, by the way. That's because Hugo got sick and I filled in for him while I was commentating anyway. But yeah, 2020, I kind of just dove into the world of commentary. I started doing 300 plus broadcasts a year for 3 or 4 years. And fortunate enough that I started working with some great people, bigger and bigger opportunities, and eventually landed myself here.
So while you're doing the esports, you're at your own location. Typically, we're at a racetrack. We can walk through the paddock. We can go to all the different teams' haulers, talk to the drivers, get information to utilize during the broadcast. But when you're at home in your man cave, your broadcast center, how do you gather all of the info that then you'll utilize throughout different portions of the esports race?
And I guess that's kind of a thing that's translated into the real world, is I've always been a curious person by nature. And I've never had a problem messaging someone and saying, explain this to me. I don't understand XYZ. Talk to me about your strategy. Why are you doing this? And for the most part, people in the sim world are more than happy to give you that information. I think a lot of sim racing commentators don't realize that to get an answer, you first have to ask the question. And a lot of them did tell me when I started that, we don't get asked these questions by many people. So just the ability to go into a Discord, type in a question and get a response 5 minutes later from someone who's halfway around the world, it's not dissimilar to being on pit lane, going into the, garage area, just knocking on the door and asking someone there as well. So I think that's kind of what I've always relied on. And it's why I think I've been kind of successful as well, is that I like finding out information, sprinkling in all these tidbits here and there. Because if I figure if I'm curious about something, if I find it interesting, maybe someone else will as well.
It's all about chemistry, working with your teammates. And I know on the NBC team, one of my teammates can start a sentence and I can finish it just because we've worked so long with each other. And when you're working a situation like that where your booth mates are not there, how do you work just on the flow so that you're not stepping on each other and it has a really nice mix?
That's a great question, because it really depends. If it's someone who you're familiar with, let's be honest, it's easy. You can, like you say, kind of know when they're trailing off, so you know when to pick up. Obviously, when it's someone who's maybe you're working with for the first time, and sometimes in sim racing commentary, I've liked to try and bring people into broadcasts who have never done it before. I'm a big advocate for get a driver in as the analyst, because they can explain things, break them down in a way often that, as a play-by-play commentator, it's not my place to do so, right? So love getting them in. And so in those cases, it's a lot more about holding their hand and working through that. Sometimes we're lucky enough, like for the IMSA Esports Global Championship, where I can actually look at my other commentators. And so if there's something that I see them putting their finger up, I go, okay.
Hand signals and...
Exactly. And so I think that's often the best. I will say that's sometimes a detriment. I once did a broadcast where we were having a couple of technical issues, and my co-commentator, trying to make light of the situation, made a joke saying, I've got to dig out my CSI Miami goggles, did this on his webcam, and set us both off into fits of laughter that took us about a couple of minutes to recover from. But usually, if you're in a position where you can do that, that's the best way to have some kind of flow.
Everyone's career, it's always about a phone call. Are you available this weekend? So when you made the transition from doing iRacing to being on an actual IMSA pit lane, when was the phone call? What was it like? What was the opportunity? And what went through your mind? Because this is another level of your dream.
Well, it started with a Facebook message from Eve, the responsible adult at Radio Show Limited, saying, check your WhatsApp messages. Because as many people know, I'm pretty terrible at checking and responding to a lot of my messages. But it was, are you free? Laguna at the time, I was living in San Francisco, so it's a 90-minute drive for me to head down to Laguna Seca, which I often did to go play golf. So it was no problem for me to go and spend a weekend at a racetrack. I very quickly, though, realized this is a different situation than commentary. And I think you can probably relate to this as well. I find commentary at this point easy. It's not difficult. It's sit down, look at the screen, use the information that I have, tell the story, listen to the producer, and go from there. As a pit lane reporter, I feel a lot more like a journalist. I have to go in advance, walk through the garage, do my research, take those notes down, start building the storylines that I'm going to want to focus on, but then realize that as soon as the race starts, something's going to happen. I'll throw all my plans out the window, and I'll be scrambling trying to figure out what's happening. And you have a few more support tools than I do on pit lane. You have some extra pit lane reporters and producers as well. Laguna, being by myself, with no one else there, as you can relate to, the cell service never works. There's only one screen that you can look at on pit lane. It was a trial by fire, but I don't think I've ever had so much fun just being thrown into a situation like that. And it was great.
I had someone ask me, so throughout my racing career, what has been the hardest series to dive into, to prepare, to do my broadcasts with? And I said, to me, it's very easy. It's the IMSA WeatherTech series, because you look at, endurance race, 3-4 drivers per car, and then you start doing the math. And then you look at the men and women that go over the wall. And to me, some people view it as being a journalist. I view it more as like I'm the entertainment department, because folks are sitting at home and they're tuned in. They love racing, whether they're new to it or they're a core fan generationally. But at the end of the day, yes, it's about the pit stop. It's putting on the Michelins, the VP fuel, but also to me, it's about the front tire changer.
Yeah.
It's about the guy who is carrying the tires.
It's all the stories.
It's all the stories of the men and women. And that's why I always say the cars are the stars, but the heartbeat of the sport are the men and women. It's the people. And so you start doing all the math and you look at how many potential stories that could come into either an endurance race, or one of our 3-hour broadcasts. And so to me, and I always tell people and now I've gone to the iPad. So now I'm not killing as many trees and rewriting or retyping stuff over and over and over, but still you're adding in so much new info for each broadcast. And I really only use about 2% of it. But in the back of my mind, I know if something goes on, with Action Express, I've got 9 stories that I could do during the broadcast. Same thing with Corvette. I did a story at Indy with pictures, which I love being able to show and tell, with Brian Hoyce, who's the crew chief on the number 3 Corvette. His son had been at Indy, 11, 12 years ago as a little kid, having lunch with Tommy Milner when they had pictures of it. And then you fast forward. Well, guess what? Brian Hoy's son is now the fueler on Tommy Milner's number 4 Corvette. And so life comes full circle, but being able to have those storytelling opportunities to make a connection for fans at home, because you look at how the crowds have exploded. Petit Le Mans, the largest sports car crowd in North American history. And so I've used so many of our new fans as free agent fans. So I try to make a connection for them.
So they can figure out who they want to support.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what has been your favorite moment so far being on an IMSA pit lane?
Single favorite moment? Well, I think one of my friends' favorite moments may have been a VIR when I almost got hit on pit lane. That's half joke. I didn't really get hit, but I got told quite loudly to move out of the way of a car oncoming. I think my favorite moment, though, evening at Petit Le Mans, because it was my first time experiencing night racing on pit lane. I've been to the Rolex for the last couple of years, so obviously I've seen it, but it's different when you're down there on pit lane. You see the pit stops, you see the crew going to work, you see the tiredness from the crew as well. So I think that's probably my favorite moment. I took a couple of photos and videos of just the cars flying past the pit lane and start-finish straight. I think that was pretty cool. That was my most special moment, especially when the Valkyrie fires off on pit lane. That's always great.
I love that when the cars always fire up and you hear them start out on battery and then boom, they kick in, especially the Cadillac. It's a boom, boom. It's just one of those magical moments. And like you, I love the piece of night racing and being out on pit lane. And it's completely different than the day. And you can't explain it. You can't come up with the words to say, this is the difference. But there's such a difference. And talking to different drivers that were at the test in Daytona, we were just talking about what's your favorite part of the race, minus the final hour.
Mm-hmm.
And they all would say, I love being there when we're in the night and then the sun comes up and you can see it just coming above NASCAR 3 as you're heading into the bus stop, and just the array of colors. It's like a massive, palette of colors as the sun's breaking through, and it's just a magical moment.
I'm looking forward to seeing that next year.
So you made the big move from the West Coast to the East Coast. So did you pack everything you had in your car? Did you have a moving truck? How did you get ready for the next stage of doing all of the IMSA WeatherTech races for IMSA Radio?
No, I had some moving help. What happened was I drove first to Laguna Seca for the IndyCar race, and from there went straight to Road America for our IMSA event, and then drove down to Charlotte, where I slowly started to make my way and unpack my boxes. Yeah, I'm excited. I loved California, but the main problem with it was just how far away it is from most of the events we're at. Whereas now I'm within driving distance, which is great. I love the chance to mentally reset. When I get in that car and I'm driving to the track, I can put my day job behind me. I can just start thinking about the weekend ahead. So I'm very excited. Charlotte's been fun to me. Been playing a lot of golf the last couple of weeks as well, which has been fun down in South Carolina. So taking advantage of what I can.
I tell people you'd be surprised that, yes, Charlotte is the hub for NASCAR, but basically it's a co-hub for sports car racing.
Yes.
Between Charlotte and Indianapolis, that's pretty much almost everybody. You know, the major percentage of teams are based here. You look at Penske, you know, WRT moved here for BMW.
DXDT's up here.
DXDT. I mean, Bassler Sullivan, Riley, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's a great hub and a great community for the sports car set.
Yeah. When I drove across the country, I got a roof box and I slowly started putting stickers on it. Every IMSA event, I go often to the Toronto Motorsport stand, buy the stickers that Mr. Warwick does. And I was just picking up some food, I forget when, sometime in late August. Went inside, grabbed it, and by the time I got back out, someone had slipped a Vassar Sullivan championship sticker under my windshield. Straight onto the roof box it went.
So we always love to end our show with where it begins for us being car people. And that's when you turn 16, you get your license, and then you get your first car. So what was the first set of wheels that you had when you could drive legally on the street?
So I didn't get my license till I was 22. I turned 18 the day I got to the US for college, and the day you can start driving in Singapore was 18. So I was a late bloomer. But my first car post-college was a Hyundai Sonata. Bright blue, 2-liter turbo.
Interior?
Grayish. I drove that one across the country as well when I moved from Atlanta to California in 2018. So that was my first car.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you stopping by. And remember the IMSA Esports Global Championship. 2 down, 2 to go, 2 race weekend. So Sunday, November 23rd, and the time is?
1:15 p.m. Eastern for the LMP3 Challenge that kicks off the show. We have a bunch of IMSA paddock people. We had Morgan Burkhardt, Nathan Nicholson, Aaron Johnson, Daniel Morad, a whole bunch of people competing with us. So come and join us.
And the fourth and final race, we're going to close out the IMSA Esports Global Championship at the Big D, Daytona, my home track, and it's going to be December 7th. Don't forget, you can log on to IMSA's YouTube page, and you can see all the great action, and there's going to be $25,000 up for grabs. So money, fun, it's IMSA. It's the perfect blend and a perfect mix. So appreciate Arjuna Kankipati stopping by. Also, Robby Foley, and you too, spending time with us right here on the IMSA Endurance Hour podcast. Until next time, we'll see you at the track.